Hey guys, welcome to week 2 of CodeReach. This week we're going to be implementing a shooting function into a game that we started last week. In case you don't have the game that we started last week, you can look at the link in the description to download all the assets along with the script. And to start off, we're going to break this function into smaller problems and work at them one by one to try and get you to the final product. I'll give you guys a few minutes to work on this code, and then I'll come back to show you guys how I did it and how you can implement the same function in your script. Okay, so we're going to start off by making a shooting function. So first we're just going to make the function here, and we're going to check if the key of spacebar is pressed. So if it's pressed, we're going to print something out, and over here just print something. And then as you can see here, I played the game without actually calling the function, which is a very common mistake. So you want to make sure you actually go to your game loop and call the function. So here we are, just type in shoot with the brackets, and then now if you run the game, you'll see that when we press spacebar, something prints out. Okay, so now that we've done this task, we can start working on our second task. Okay, so now we know when the player presses spacebar. Now we need to figure out how to add bullets to the game. If we think ahead, we know that when the bullet hits an enemy, we're going to need to know the location of the bullet so we can check if it's actually hitting the enemy or not, which means we're going to need to store the location of every bullet the player fires. So, what can we use to store the location of every single bullet the player fires and in a way that we can access it later? Try and figure this out, and I'll come back in a few minutes to show you how to do it. Okay, so now we're going to be adding bullets every time the player presses spacebar. So the way we're going to do this is using a list. If you remember last time, we used a list for the enemy position every time we wanted to add an enemy. So that we can do the same thing for bullets. We create a list for bullets, and in this list we're going to be adding more lists, which is just the position of the player when you press spacebar. So over here we can go bullets.append to add the position of the player, and the position has two variables, right, the x and the y. So we're going to add a list to the list, and the list is going to contain the two variables, the x and the y. So now if you actually print out the list before playing the game, just go underneath the same thing and write print with the name of your list, and that will print out all the bullets that are currently in the game. So at first we have no bullets because we haven't pressed spacebar, but as soon as we press spacebar, you'll see that the location of the player is added. Now those are a lot of numbers that don't really matter because the computer is going to be handling them. So you can delete that print statement because we're not going to need it. Okay, so now we have a list that contains the location of every single bullet. Our next task is going to be to draw those bullets. So now we're going to want to create a function that takes the location of every single bullet from those lists and draws them out. You can try and use a for loop to make this function. So I'll let you guys try that for a few minutes, then I'll come back and show you guys how I did it. Okay, so now we're going to make our draw function, and in order for this, first we're going to make a function, and now we need to go through every single bullet at every single frame to draw each one of them. So we're going to use a for loop to go through everything, since we're looping through every single bullet. For this, I'm going to use a for each loop for every bullet in the bullets list. So now that I have every bullet in the bullets list, I'm going to need to draw the rectangle at every single x and y location of the bullet. As you can remember, we saved the x and y location in a list inside the bullets list. So first we can draw a rectangle, draw it on the screen, green. I don't think I actually saved a preset, so I'm going to go back here and actually draw it in as an RGB value, so 02550. Then we're going to make it at the location of the actual bullet. So we saved it as an x and y location. So first we're going to get the x location, which is the first index of the list, and the second index of the list is the y location, and then we can draw it as a 10 by 10 rectangle. So now that we've accessed the x and y location of every single bullet and drawn it, it's going to draw every single bullet when we press spacebar. So now if we call our function for draw bullets and run this program, you can see that it draws something on the screen every time we press spacebar. Obviously the bullets aren't moving yet and it's not centered, so first let's take care of the centered issue. We can go over here and press and add an offset to our draw to make it so that it's centered. We'll just add 20 and see if that works. So 20 draws it centered on the spaceship, so we can just leave it at 20, and now we can worry about moving the bullets. So let's talk about that in the next task. Okay, so now we have a bullet drawn every time we press spacebar. Now we need these bullets to move upward so they can actually hit the enemy. So in order to do this, we're going to need to implement something that moves the bullet upward at every single frame. We already have a loop that goes through every single bullet, so now try to use that loop and try to use the Y position of each bullet to try and move the Y position up at every single frame. Try to do this in the next few minutes and I'll be back to let you know how I did it. Okay, so this one's actually quite easy. All we need to do is actually make it so that the Y position of each bullet actually subtracts every time we go through each frame. So we can do something like Y minus equals 5. And now if we run the game, every time we press spacebar, you can see that the Y position of each rectangle goes up as we press spacebar. Okay, so now we have bullets moving upwards. Now we need to add a delay so that the bullets don't come out too fast, otherwise the game would become way too easy. So try and find a way to add a delay so that the player can only shoot one bullet every few seconds. Okay, so now we want to add a delay to our shooting function. In order to do this, I used a boolean. If you remember, a boolean is something that's true or false. I call this boolean can shoot, and I set it to true at first. So now we can go into our actual shooting function and make it so that you can only shoot if the can shoot boolean is true. Now after we've shot a bullet, what we want to do is we want to turn can shoot to false. So if they can shoot and if they press the spacebar, you add a bullet to the screen and then you turn can shoot to false. This will make it so you can only shoot one bullet. But there's a problem here. Can shoot is a global variable, but we're trying to use it inside here. And we actually changed the value of can shoot. So in order to make it so that we can use this variable, we have to turn it to a global variable. This is a problem that you have with some variables in functions, and you just have to add global to the top of the function in order to get it to work. So now you can see we can shoot one bullet, but then we can't shoot any bullets after that. Okay, so now we want to reset our shooting function every few seconds. So what we can do is actually use a timer. So I'm going to make an else statement here that runs if you can't shoot. So if can shoot's set to false, then we're gonna have a timer run. Now I'm gonna create the timer up here and make timer equals 0. Okay, so now if we can't shoot, we're gonna increase the timer by 1 every single frame. So we can do timer plus equals 1. And now that we're increasing the timer at every single frame, what we can do is we can check if the timer is equal to a certain amount to reset can shoot. So if timer is equal to 150, we can reset can shoot to true and then set timer to 0. So that makes it so that the timer is reset and we can reuse it afterwards. So now if you run this game, you'll see that we actually get an error when we try to shoot. And that's again because we didn't call timer as a global variable when we tried to change its value. So we can go and set global timer and rerun this code, and as you'll see, every few seconds we can shoot out a single bullet. Okay, so now we can move on to the next task. Okay, so now we have an image of a rectangle moving upwards every time the player presses spacebar. Now it's time to replace this image of a rectangle with an image of a bullet. I've supplied a link to an image of a bullet in the description below, or you can use your own image of a bullet. Try to do this and I'll come back in a few minutes to show you how I did it. Okay, so now to blit an image, what we're going to do is first take an image. So I linked this image in the description below. So you can use the same image of a bullet, or you can use your own image. So now if we go into our code, we can scroll up, and just like we imported images of enemies and players, we can import a bullet image. So we're going to say bullet equals image.load bullet.png. Okay, so you can resize the bullet, but I think this bullet is the correct size, and you can check that by drawing the bullet on the screen before resizing to check what size it is. So we're just going to draw this bullet at 0, 0 and see what size it is. And it looks like about the right size for me, so I don't need to resize it. If you need to resize it, you can use the same code used for resizing enemies and players to resize that. Now I'm going to go to where we draw our rect, and instead I'm going to draw the bullet. So we're going to do screen.blit to draw the picture, and then we're gonna put in the argument of the bullet. And now for the X and Y position, we're gonna do the same thing we did for the Rex. We're gonna do the bull at 0 and bull at 1 to get the X and the Y coordinates of each bullet. And we have to add the +20 to get the offset so that it shoots from the middle. And as you can see, we have bullets shooting out of our spaceship now. Okay, so now that we have a picture of a bullet moving upwards, the last thing we need to add is collisions with the enemy. So when the bullet hits the enemy, we want the bullet to go away and the enemy to go away. So first we need to detect when the bullet hits the enemy. So I want you to think about how to do this for a few seconds. This is probably the most difficult task we're going to do so far, so just think about it and then I'll come back. Okay, so in order to check collisions, first we're going to create a function for checking collisions. So we'll just call it check collision. And now in this collision checker, we're going to need to check every single bullet with every single enemy to check if they're colliding. So what we're going to do is create a nested for loop, which is a for loop inside a for loop. So we're going to check for bull in bullets and for enemy and enemy positions. This is going to compare every single bullet with every single enemy position. And when we do that, we can use their positions to check if they're colliding. So remember, we have to make bullets and enemy position global. And then we can continue with the next step. Okay, so the next step here is going to be checking if the bullet collides with the enemy, and then removing the bullet and the enemy from the screen. So first I'm just going to write down some pseudocode, just some fake code. So if they collide, then we want them to die. So now we're going to run through the math of how the collisions will work. Okay, so now we need to check for collisions. So what we can do is some math to check if the player's the bullets is inside the enemy. So what we can do is we can set boundaries in the X and the Y and check if the bullet X is inside the enemy X and the bullet Y is inside the enemy Y, that means they're colliding. So first let's check the X. If the bullet X is inside the enemy X, that means that the tip of the bullet is going to be somewhere inside the enemy. So the tip of the bullet is actually offset from where the actual location of the bullet is, because it prints from here and it draws it out like that. So that means there's about 10 pixels of offset for me. So what I'm going to do is check if bull at X is greater than enemy at X plus 10. This gives me a 10 pixel offset and checks if this is anywhere ahead of this side. So now we need to check if the X is also less than the other side. So we're going to say and if enemy X is less than, and now we need to get the position of this side. So to get the X coordinate for this side, what we can do is just do the original X plus the width of the enemy. So we can do if bullet X is less than enemy X plus 40. Now by doing this, we've checked if the player's X position is anywhere between these 2 points. Okay, so now we want to do the math for the enemy Y position. So that means we want to check if the bullet's Y position is inside the enemy's Y position. So if the bullet's Y position is anywhere between here. So to do that, we can just use some math again. So we can say if bullet Y is greater than enemy Y. And so that's going to check if the bullet's Y position is greater than anywhere here. And again, there's no offset because the sprite actually renders from the top. So we can do that, and we can check if it's anywhere below here. So we can do if bullet y is less than enemy y. So enemy y, and now we want to get the offset from here to here. So that would be the height of enemy y. So basically we can do plus, I think the height of the enemy y was 30. So now we have our two if statements we can use to check if enemy x and enemy y are in bullet x and bullet y are inside enemy x and enemy y. So let's turn this over into code. Okay, so now that we've done the math, we can start making the actual code in our program. So I'm going to use an if statement and just write in everything we did before, but instead of bullet x and bullet y and enemy x and enemy y, we're going to use the indexes of their things in the list, so bullet at 0 and bullet at 1. And now that we've done the math, after this all we have to do is implement the part of the function where we remove the actual bullet and the enemy from the screen after they've hit each other. So after we've done the math, I'll come back and show you how to do that. Okay, so now we want to remove the enemy and the bullet every time they hit each other. So what we're going to do is just write in these two lines of code, bullet.remove bolt and enemy pause.remove enemy. So this is going to remove the bullet from the bullets list and the enemy pause from the enemy pause list, and that'll make it so they're not playing anymore, since that's where the location of the two items is. So when I read in my code here, I realized that I didn't actually call the function. So I just went back and I wrote check collisions in my game loop, and I ran it again, and as you can see, the game now hits the enemy every time you shoot a bullet. So that's it. That's the whole shooting function. In case you want to go back and look over this video, there will be a shorter version of this video posted, and all the resources will be in the link in the description, as well as the finalized code. So thank you for watching, and come back next week to finish the game up.